So, what happens when an empire finally falls? I mean, sure, the maps get redrawn, new flags go up, but what about what's inside people's heads? That's really where we find postcolonialism. It's a way of looking at the incredible, sometimes messy, shifts in culture and identity that truly shaped the world we're all living in today.
Just wrap your head around this for a second. At its absolute peak, the British Empire ruled over 1 out of every 4 people on the entire planet. That's not just some dry statistic. It's a world-changing reality that set the stage for everything that was about to come next.
So what exactly is postcolonialism? Well, at its heart, it's the study of what happens after the colonizers pack up and leave. It dives deep into that complicated, often confrontational dialogue between the old empires and the new nations that are fighting to find their own voice.
Okay, let's really dig into what this all means. We'll start with a quick look at what the world was like when colonial power was at its height.
You know, for centuries, just a handful of European countries had stretched their control across almost the entire globe. And this wasn't just about planting flags on a map. No, it was a complete imposition of language, of laws, of culture, forced onto millions of people whose own traditions were often just brushed aside. So, what happens when these massive globe-spanning empires start to crumble? Well, the world map begins to look very, very different. And so does the way people see themselves and their place in it.
Just look at this timeline. The sheer speed of change right after World War II it's just breathtaking. You've got India and Pakistan in 1947, then boom, jump to 1960. They literally call it the Year of Africa because so many nations declared their independence. This wasn't some slow trickle, it was a tidal wave. The floodgates opened.
But here's the thing, gaining political independence, that was just step one. All of a sudden, people were looking around their own cities, their own towns, and asking some really tough questions. Like, wait a minute, why is there a statue of a foreign general in our main square? Whose history are my kids learning in school? The fight for freedom was quickly becoming a fight for identity. And all of this cultural questioning, it lit a creative fire. Artists, writers, poets from these newly independent nations, they grabbed this moment to tell their own stories in their own voices. This powerful, defiant act of storytelling, that is the beating heart of postcolonial literature. And really, it all came down to this one central challenge. How do you find your own voice when, for centuries, someone else has been telling your story for you? Well, their answer was simple. You write back.
And as they began to write, their work grappled with 3 huge central themes: the language they were often forced to speak, the racism they had to endure, and the fundamental question of their own identity in this brave new world.
Let's start with language, because this quote just absolutely nails it. The colonizers' language was never, ever just about communication. It was a tool, right? A tool to make people feel inferior, to suggest that civilized thinking could only happen in English or French.
And this sparked a really fierce debate among writers. Do you do what the great Chinua Achebe did and basically hijack the colonizer's language, bending it and reshaping it to tell your own stories from the inside? Or do you go the route of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who argued that true freedom meant abandoning it completely and returning to your mother tongue?
Then, of course, there's the raw, undeniable legacy of racism. Post-colonial writers didn't shy away from this. They confronted it head-on. They wrote about not just personal prejudice, but the cold, calculated, systematic racism that was literally built into the law, like with apartheid in South Africa.
So, when you're trying to navigate these deep legacies of language and race, what in the world does that do to your sense of self? Well, it leads to this really fascinating concept called hybridity. It's the idea that after centuries of contact, no culture is really pure anymore. Instead, what you get are these new, blended identities, forged in the friction between the two worlds. And you can feel this hybridicity just pulsing through the novels of Salman Rushdie, where ancient Indian myths get tangled up in English prose. You can hear it in the very rhythm of Derek Walcott's poetry as he masterfully weaves together his African and European ancestry to create something entirely new, something uniquely Caribbean. And what's so fascinating is that these huge, powerful ideas, they couldn't just be contained in novels and poems. They spilled out, and they sparked a whole new field of study dedicated to unpacking all of these dynamics: postcolonial theory. And if there's one foundational name you need to know here, it's Edward Said. His 1978 book, Orientalism, was an absolute bombshell. It systematically broke down how the West basically invented this simplified, exotic, and often demeaning caricature of the East, all to make it easier to control.
But, and this is so important, we have to be really careful with that little word post. Is the colonial era really over for everyone? As this quote points out, for many indigenous peoples like Native Americans, this struggle isn't a memory from the past. They describe it as ongoing colonialism, a powerful reminder that these fights for sovereignty are happening right now.
Which, of course, leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. Just look around you. Look at the lines on a world map, at global politics, at economic inequality, at the very stories we tell ourselves about who we are. How much of our world, right here and right now, is still living in the long shadow of empire?